Pharaohs of Fashion by me, John Lee. In this presentation, I will examine ancient Egypt's system of hierarchy and how it relates to clothing, cosmetics, and personal adornment. Please enjoy. First, I'll provide a brief overview of Egypt's class structure. At the top of the pyramid were pharaohs and queens. Below them were priests, scribes, and viziers. Next on the list were craftsmen and skilled artists/workers. At the bottom of the chain of command were peasants, servants, and slaves. Now we'll take a look at Egyptian linen and its many uses. In ancient Egypt, linen was a valuable commodity used for clothing, bedding, blankets, cushions, and other purposes. The Fertile Crescent provided vast amounts of plant fibers such as flax. These natural fibers would be spun into thread and used to weave fabric. Linens were made using a loom, usually a horizontal loom, shown in the photo. Fun fact, when the linen became too worn to be used by the living, it was put aside and used for mummification. In general, the bandages used to wrap a mummy were torn from old linen sheets. Clothing. Fashion for men and women, rich or poor, changed very little over the centuries in ancient Egypt. The clothing worn by men and women was made of linen, and it was simple in design and lightweight for the hot climate. All men, from tomb worker to the pharaoh, wore a kind of kilt or apron that varied in length over the years, from about halfway above the knee to around halfway below it. It was tied in the front, folded in at the side, or in two knots at the hips. A sleeve-like garment, a sleeved shirt-like garment, was also fashionable during this time. Women typically wore straight ankle-length dresses that usually had straps that tied at the neck or behind the shoulders. Some dresses had short sleeves, or women wore short robes tied over their shoulders. Later fashions show that the linen was folded into many vertical pleats, and fringes were put at the edges. Women's dresses were at times ornamented with beads. Shawls were sometimes worn in the New Kingdom. The Egyptian climate, with its hot summers and mild winters, favored light clothing made from plant fibers, predominantly linen, and in Roman times, occasionally cotton, an import from India. Wool was used at a lesser extent. Animal skins, above all leopard skins, were sometimes worn by priests and by pharaohs in their role as first servants of the god. Such outfits were found in Tutankhamun's tomb and were depicted quite frequently on the walls of tombs. Cloth was wrapped around the body and held in place by a belt most of the time. Everyday clothing was mostly undecorated, though as discussed earlier, pleating was known since the Old Kingdom, when some dresses of upper-class Egyptians were pleated horizontally. Fun fact, cleanliness was apparently next to godliness in ancient Egypt. And who was closer to the gods than the pharaohs themselves? Since earliest historic times, the titles of chief washer of the palace and washer to the pharaoh are known, and keeping the royal clothes lily white was the duty of the chief bleacher. Jewelry. Egyptians adorned themselves with as much jewelry as they could afford. Pairs of bracelets were worn around the wrist or high on the arm, above the elbows. Rings and anklets were also worn. Women wore large round earrings and put bands around their heads, or held the hair in place with ivory and metal hairpins. Ordinary people wore necklaces made of brightly colored pottery beads. Headdresses and crowns were very popular, especially with royalty. The headdress has significance and brings a message about the wearer. The pharaohs are always represented wearing crowns, but whether this is a pictorial convention or whether they did so in everyday life cannot be decided. Hair and wigs. The Egyptians cared about their appearance and styled their wigs, worn by men and women. A woman would place a cone made of fat-soaked and sweet-smelling ointment on her head, which slowly melted over her wig during a warm evening. Men were always clean-shaven, using razors made from bronze to shave their heads and beards. Cosmetics and perfumes. The women spent a lot of time bathing, rubbing oils and perfumes into their skin, and using their many cosmetic implements to apply makeup. Both men and women wore blue and green eyeshadow and black eyeliner. Using a highly polished bronze hand mirror, a woman would apply kohl, a black dye kept in a jar or pot, to line her eyes and eyebrows using a brush or pencil made of a reed. Men also wore this eye makeup as well, which was not only a fashion but also protected against the eye infections which were common in Egypt. They would also use a dye called henna to redden their hands and nails and lips too. Footwear. The Egyptians went barefoot much of the time, but wore sandals on special occasions or when their feet were likely to get hurt. Wealthy people wore sandals made of leather. The sandals were tied with two tongs, and if they had a pointed tip, this was often turned upwards. They were made of leather or rush, woven or stitched together, and often had leather soles and straps. The cheapest kind of sandals were plant-based and affordable to all, even the very poorest. Early Middle Kingdom shoes were little more than sandals with straps between the toes and joined to the sides at the heel, with the upper leather just covering the foot, without being fastened to the foot itself. In conclusion, ancient Egypt's social class system was intricately woven into the fabric of daily life, extending its tendrils into the realms of clothing, makeup, and cosmetics. The opulence of the pharaoh's attire, the meticulous artistry of cosmetics, and the fragrant symbols of luxury all spoke to the stratified society that flourished along the Nile. The study of ancient Egypt's social class system and its relationship with personal adornment offers a unique lens into the complexities of civilization that left an indelible mark on human history. Through the clothing choices, makeup practices, and fragrant indulgences of ancient Egypt, we glimpse not only their aesthetic preferences, but also the intricate dance of power, spirituality, and cultural evolution that define their society. Thank you for watching this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new.